All right, welcome back, everybody. We are in episode number 5, and we have already explored quite complex ideas, but hopefully the companion guide has been of great utility for you to be able to just see how the ideas connect with one another. Okay, but right now I'm going to do a quick recap of episode 3. Just to refresh our memories a little bit before we dive into the topic of episode 5. So last time we basically explored the fact that as human beings, we are full of desires, right? But not all of them point in the same direction. We want pleasure, we want health, freedom, connection, success, and all at once, everything, And often these desires conflict with each other. They are incompatible at times. But the key insight that we looked at last time is that we don't just follow our desires blindly. We do not treat every single desire the same. We actually evaluate them. We evaluate our desires. We ask ourselves, should I want this? Or is this desire worth following? And we also look at the distinction of the philosopher Harry Frankfurt between first order desires and second order desires. And if you remember, first order desires were these desires that are basic, the biological desires based on the body. And then we also have the second order desires, which is basically our deeper reflective desires about what we should want. We also talked about this second order desire as a desire about a desire, which we have called metabiological desires, meaning beyond the biological desire, right? And it's in these second order metabiological desires that we start to see ourselves not just as creatures who want things, but also as moral agents capable of moral judgment. Now, in this episode, we are diving deeper into what these metabiological desires are and what they reveal about our ethical lives, about our moral lives, okay? So this will be the focus of episode number 5. Welcome to the Philosophy in Real Life podcast, where we strive to live meaningful lives by pursuing truth and unmasking the lies in our culture. I'm your host, Carlos Santos, a philosophy PhD from Spain. Welcome to Season 2, The Ethics of Desire. All right, so today we are going to dive deeper into these second order desires, and in order to do so, we are going to resort to a Canadian philosopher, Charles Taylor, and his analysis between weak evaluation and strong evaluation. And this will help us understand how our moral agency is connected to these metabiological desires. Let's start with the weak evaluation. So the first thing that we can say about the weak evaluation. So weak evaluation, according to Charles Taylor, is when we compare desires based on personal satisfaction or outcomes without asking any moral question. So it's basically a type of evaluation that we carry out, but that is not moral. For example, you prefer chocolate ice cream over vanilla. Fine. So there's no morality there. It's just based on taste. And, you cannot make people feel guilty for liking chocolate ice cream over vanilla ice cream. Although you find all kinds of people that would do that, right? Or you choose maybe a Peruvian restaurant instead of an Italian one. I actually prefer both, but if you force me to pick one, I will definitely pick the Peruvian cuisine or restaurant to eat that. Now, these are weak evaluations because, again, there's no moral weight here. It's just about taste, mood, or convenience in the moment. Maybe the Peruvian restaurant is closer to us than the Italian restaurant, and that's that. Now, in the weak evaluation, there is sometimes an evaluation of the reasons why we pick something, right? So in the case of the ice cream, it's like you either like something or not, and that's that. It's not your fault that your taste buds prefer chocolate ice cream over vanilla ice cream, for example. Okay. Now, there is a type of, what would you say, weak evaluation that we carry out when it comes to desiring different things, in which we do ponder or we do try to discern the reasons there, even though it's not moral, this type of evaluation. Okay, so for example, maybe in the summer, what you feel like doing is maybe going to a quiet mountain vacation, right? So maybe you are this type of people who like silence retreat, which I highly recommend, or a type of vacation just to settle, to like to your inner peace, to get in touch with yourself, to calm down your nervous system and all of that. So maybe that is one of the considerations for that type of holiday. But maybe you are a different person and you like maybe an action-packed type of city trip, like going hard. And this actually reminds me of my marriage, because I am the type of traveler that I like going to maybe 1 or 2 places, eating and just chilling out and talking all the time. But my wife is the type of traveler who likes going hardcore, nonstop. I almost feel like I need another holidays to rest from the holidays I have with her, because she is like, go, 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 right? Now with a kid, it's different. It's like a slower pace, but oh boy, before the kid, it was intense, the holidays. So as you can see, we have different types of taste, even when it comes to these holidays, for a different bunch of reasons. But in this case, we are still not necessarily assessing what is better or worse. Yes, we're assessing, but it's not so much that we are assessing this from a moral standpoint, even though we might have a stronger preference from one over the other. And there is still like some form of evaluation about it. But it's an evaluation, again, that is not so much moral. I hope that makes sense. I know that it sounds a little bit like confusing, but this is basically an evaluation based on taste, based on mood, based on personal preference. And of course, this is not so clear cut in real life, because sometimes we have weak evaluations about things that then are linked to some moral aspect of our lives, of course, because we are not a textbook, where you can separate our experiences of meaning and morality and taste in chapters. No, this is all together simultaneously, being as a human being, as an embodied agent. So it's very complicated to do that type of differentiation, so to speak. All right. So on the other hand, we have a strong evaluation, which this is the type of evaluation that is moral. A strong evaluation happens when we don't just ask, oh, what do I want? But actually we ask something like, is this desire actually good? Or is this worthy of being followed, of being admired, of being praised? Is worthy of praise or admiration? So for example, maybe you want to say, again, something spiteful during an argument, or maybe you are driving and you have this road rage, somebody cut you off or something like that when you were driving, and you just want to react in anger, and then you hold back because you recognize that impulse is either selfish or cruel, or or it's just way too much, it's out of proportion. So whenever we kind of like go into this type of thoughts about our actions, like, oh, maybe that wasn't the right comment. Or so I don't know if this happens to you. Sometimes I'm after work, then I'm hanging out with my friends or my wife or something like that, and they make a comment or something, and then I reply, or I answer in a way that is actually quite mean, and I'm even shocked with myself, like where did this come from? Like I don't know that I was angry or that I was upset about something. So many times, then you reflect about it. It's like, oh, maybe my answer or the way I reply wasn't the best. And so as you can see, this is a strong evaluation, not before the action, but not even during the action, but sometimes it's after the action or the reply or the thing that you then realize that maybe wasn't that good, that you weren't that nice, or that you probably would have liked to react differently. Now, sometimes these strong evaluations manifest themselves, or they appear in our lives as a way of admiration. Sometimes we admire people for a bunch of different reasons. Maybe you admire this person because this person is faithful and loyal, and deep down you sense that there is something worth pursuing in that type of loyalty. It's a value or something that is important for the good life. It has a deeper worth, and then you feel like, wow, this type of way of being is something that is just good, no matter who does it, and it really pulls you. It really like it almost like without your permission makes you feel like this deep sense of like admiration. It's like, wow, I would like to be, I don't know, this patient with my kids or something like that. I will never forget, I was staying at my good friend's house, Blake and Olivia from France in Bordeaux, and I was shocked because Blake is such a, he has such a beautiful soul. We've been friends for years, and I remember one time like he had knocked at her door, at her daughter's room, and said, "Is it okay if I come in?" And I was just shocked. I was like, "What?" So the level of respect and consideration that he had towards his daughter was really worthy of admiration, and I was like, "Wow, I would like to be that kind of dad when I become a dad." Because back then I wasn't a dad yet. Now I am, and I just find not so much the action or maybe the same action, but also like this kind of like thoughtfulness about it, of caring so much for the, I don't know, sacredness of her daughter, of his daughter, that he was willing to do something like that, like have that thought process or consideration of knocking at the door and asking, "Hey, is it okay if I come in?" And she's just 3 years old. Of course, she wasn't in danger or anything like that, but it's just to illustrate that sometimes our strong evaluation or the things that we find morally moving are found in admiration, and not so much at times in guilt or like remorse for something that you did wrong. But in any case, whether it is in this positive form or negative form, what is implicated in this type of reflection is what Charles Taylor would call a strong evaluation. Now, these judgments about reality, about this is good or bad or something, these judgments are not arbitrary, okay? We do not invent these values, but rather we perceive them. We do not create the value in something by desiring it, but rather our desiring them in terms of this strong evaluation is proof that we desire these things because we perceive the value of these things. And so this is very important, right? Certain values like integrity or fidelity or justice seem to demand our respect, even if we don't always live up to them. And even when we fall short, we feel it, right? Through guilt, shame, or inner conflict. And that's the proof that these values have a hold on us. In our lived experience as human beings, the good is revealed to us through these second-order desires, through these, what would you say, moral emotions followed by moral reflections and things like that. And so just to simplify these examples that I just gave you, we could say the following, that in our lived experience as human beings, the good is revealed to us through second-order desires. The good marks an ideal of behavior in positive and negative forms, okay? In positive forms in terms of like you should do this or you ought to do this, or in negative forms you ought not to do this or you should not do this, right? So it marks an ideal of behavior, right? So you behave like this, but you should behave like this, or you shouldn't behave like this. And so it's already projecting a different reality based on what you're living. Now, the desires we have are captured, and this is really important, from an ethical normative framework. I repeat, the desires, these second-order desires or strong evaluations, are captured from an ethical normative framework that has not been created by us. And by ethical normative framework, which is more philosophical language, I mean like a moral standard. Okay, so it tells us how we ought to behave and what we ought to desire, even when we fail to live up to that standard. And some people throughout history of philosophy and different thinkers and cultures, some people have called it the Tao, some people have called it moral conscience, the voice of reason, natural law, moral law, or the moral standard of the universe, even the logos. If you want to go to the pre-Socratics and things like that, they believe that the structure of reality intrinsically possess a logos, like intrinsic order that you should then, as a person, align yourself with that logos, that cosmic logos, that cosmic moral order of some sort, right? And so we can call it many ways, but we perceive this in our lived experience as an ideal behavior in positive and negative forms, right? And so you ought to behave like this, or you ought not to behave like this. And so again, there is always this double reality or dual reality of how we behave, what we do, what we act, and this inner reflection or strong evaluation. And in this strong evaluation, we find how we ought to live, how we ought to reply to people, how we ought to answer, how we ought to behave, right? These are positive forms or negative forms. So that is our lived experience of the good. This is really important. And this is not something theoretical that you need to accept. It's something that you can even corroborate. You can ratify what I'm saying by even reflecting on your own daily life. You can think of today. There were moments today that you felt, I shouldn't have done that, or I should have done that. And most often you will see that that implies or that entails a strong evaluation about how you are behaving and how you ought to behave, or how you are not behaving, or what you are not doing and what you ought to do, or something like that. Okay. So the point I'm trying to make with this is that this is not an ethical theory that you accept or reject, but rather this moral agency that I'm just explaining here now is a defining characteristic of all human beings. So being a human being means being a moral agent, which this implies that you have biological desires and metabiological desires. And this is inescapable. It is part of our anthropological makeup. We always act in the world guided by a moral orientation, by a moral standard, by a moral law, by a conception of the good that we take to be true. We always act in the world guided by this moral orientation that we take to be true. So there is no this place of complete neutrality and things like that. Now that we just have done this analysis of the strong evaluation, one big question about morality and the good throughout history of philosophy was whether this reality of the good, this ethical standard of values or moral law, whether this thing is objective or subjective, right? So on the one hand, you could say that if we discover morality through our metabiological desires, and those desires differ from person to person, then how can morality be objective? That's a good question, right? But on the other hand, if these values are something that we perceive rather than invent, and if they call to us, they almost judge us, right? Even when we rather ignore these values or these reflections, then the question is, aren't they in some sense independent of us? After all, you can think that we did not create the value of justice or integrity or love. We simply recognize them as good, even when we fail to live up to them. And so that is the tension, right? But in order to do justice to this topic, first of all, we need to analyze what people generally think when they hear the word objective or when they hear the word subjective, because much of what we typically call objective comes from the way the empirical science defines truth and knowledge, right? So there is like epistemology or scientific epistemology, but that in the next solo episode, because the next one is with Tristan and Santi discussing these ideas about strong evaluation, but in this next solo episode, which will be episode number 7, that's when we will address the problem with scientific objectivity and whether that type of viewpoint of reality is the adequate to assess moral truth. We will analyze that in the next episode. So I hope that makes sense. You can ask questions in the comments or whatever you need for me to clarify. But I'll see you in the next episode where Santi, Tristan, and I will discuss this idea of weak evaluation and a strong evaluation, and we'll try to explain it better, give more examples. It will be interesting to see what doubts and questions they have about this topic. But anyways, thank you for joining, and I'll see you next time.